Okay, hi everyone. You're very welcome to today's talk. My name is Aisling and I work in the Education Department at the National Museum of Ireland, Decorative Arts and History, based in Collins Barracks. And today we're bringing you a talk in partnership with Design and Crafts Council Ireland, which is an in-conversation series with the curator of the newest exhibition InForm with Dr. Edith Andrees, and two of the museum's conservators, Hannah Power and Ella McKeever. So today they are going to talk about the InForm exhibition, which is a contemporary metalwork and ceramics exhibition, and it's in collaboration with Design and Crafts Council over about a 2-year period. And it features work of the graduates of the skills and design courses in Kilkenny, alongside historic objects from the museum collections that would have inspired their work. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three speakers. Dr. Edith Andrees is going to begin first and introduce the exhibition. So Edith, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Aisling, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us on this lovely summery day in Dublin anyway. And I'm going to share the screen now and a few slides and images of the presentation. So the InForm exhibition stems from a 2-year-long project that the National Museum carried out together with the Design and Crafts Council. And you can see in the exhibition around 90 contemporary jewellery and ceramics pieces that are inspired by historic museum objects. So the old is placed next to the new contemporary object. And in this slide here, you see an example of Declan OSullivan's necklace, a sterling silver, oxidized sterling silver necklace, based on this lovely 19th century vase from Japan. And you can see a dragon there in the front on the vase, and that's movement of the dragon and the scales of the dragon, the form as well, inspired Declan's necklace. And you also have in the exhibition some of the tools that the makers use, and wonderful graphic design by Ruja Lacquer from Studio Sus, who try to tie in the historic and the contemporary. The Crafts Council, the Design and Crafts Council, is running skills courses in Kilkenny and in Thomastown. And here you see the buildings where the students were placed while we were working with them. So we worked with 22 makers from those 2 courses. And we got a chance, actually, with some museum staff to go down and try ourselves to make some jewellery and ceramic pieces, which was very, very informative. And then the students would have come up to us, to the museum, and we had tours and workshops. And in the end, each student picked 2 objects to take out of the case. So that's probably the sort of unique part around it, that we had the original historic museum objects out of the case, and everyone got a chance to examine them very closely, and that really influenced their making in a big way. So we also had access to the registers of the museum. This is where the museum comes into the object comes into the museum and is recorded on a register. And in the 19th century, there would have been an old big ledger like this one you see in the slide here, where this little box was from Japan, was recorded in 1887. And the silversmith Anne-Marie Reinhold used this as her inspiration for her brooches, silver brooches that she made. And this fish is a very light wooden box. It looks quite heavy with the metallic surface, but it's actually very light. And Anne-Marie said this was really so important to handle it and to see that actually this is not as heavy as it looks, and it changed her perspective on what she was making. So all of the students then looked at the objects really closely and started to sketch and be inspired to make maquettes, like small paper models that you can see in the image here as well on the right. And the jewellery students experimented with techniques like laser welding and hydraulic presses and different modern techniques inspired by the ancient traditional techniques. And ceramic students would try a lot of different glazes different kilns. It's a great facility in Thomastown to experiment like that and to take that time, that extra time and space. And it was really important to take the objects out of the case, I think, to push individual designs and develop individual design languages. So not just to copy the historic object, but to develop a new response. You see here in Anne-Marie Reinhold's case, the series of 7 brooches that she made echo the fish, this box that we just saw in the previous slide, 2 slides before. But yes, it's a very contemporary interpretation, of course, with the different fin-like brooches, very light appearance. And we acquired 2 jewellery pieces, one of them this brooch on the left here, the oxidized silver brooch for the permanent collection, and also Siobhan O'Sullivan's necklace I showed in the beginning is also now in the permanent collection. So the makers said it was a challenging brief as part of their course, but very enjoyable and rewarding at the same time. And we also purchased 2 ceramic pieces. You see here on the left a pinhole camera made by Antonio Lopez, and he looked at a camera in the museum collection, a 19th century camera, rectangular wooden box, and based this ceramic vessel on this historic camera. And this ceramic piece you can look through, and there's a glass disc in the center inside, mirroring back the landscape that you see. So in his case, he took pictures looking through this object with his mobile phone. He took pictures of the ceramic school in Thomastown and printed them onto those round porcelain discs in a decal process. So you have images of the school where this pinhole camera, the ceramic vessel, was made. So it comes apart, and on the inside you have a little glass disc as well. So quite a complex concept there on this one. And then we have a rushlight holder from County Kerry on the right here in the image that was chosen by Jennifer Alford, who used this character-like shape of the rushlight holder, of the iron holder, to make drawings and draw characters. And she printed those onto her porcelain form. And so they're all running up onto the top of the rectangular form. And there's a little hole on the top, and it looks as if they're disappearing inside into the hole there. But the rushlight holders, they would have been very common in Ireland around 100 years ago and prior to that, just to light your living room in a small cottage maybe, or to get that extra bit of light by either putting a candle in if you had it, or just rushes that you'd find outside. Just clip them into the arms of the holder. So a very common object really from the Irish Folklife collection. And then this very contemporary, modern and sleek response really in terms of form by Jennifer Alford. So those are now in the permanent collection as well, those 2 sets of objects. And it wasn't just the students and the tutors indeed as well who learned a lot through the project process and the project was also the museum staff. So we got a chance to take objects out of the reserve collections that we don't really look at on a regular basis and to examine them anew and learn in the process as well. And I hand over now to Hannah, and after that to Ellen, to tell you a little bit about the conservation projects that they completed as part of the project. So Hannah, over to you.
Thanks, Edith. This is a nest of boxes in need of conservation treatment. The register entry just says decorative box, so where it was made is unknown. Sarah Power picked this piece out because of the detailed patterns that a flat surface can appear to have depth, texture and movement. And this is because the decoration is straw marquetry. Dyed stalks of straw are flattened and cut, arranged in patterns, then glued and pressed to paper. And the natural grain of the straw and the silica surface of the stalk produce a light reflecting effect when cut and stuck. So it all depends on the cut angle and the complexity of the pattern arrangement on how it reflects light. Unfortunately, the surface was very dirty, which reduced the play of the light. And on one side of the box lid, it's missing with a very jagged break edge. And many small pieces of straw were lifting at the edges and some were fully detached. And as you can see, the main box is significantly light faded compared to the smaller boxes. I thought it was older than it was on first sight because of the faded look. But after lifting the smaller box out with the purple strips, I realized this could only be a man-made dye. And the first aniline purple dye, which was Perkins mauve, was invented in 1856. So this gave me a date indication for the box. Next slide, please. Inside the boxes are 318 mother-of-pearl gaming counters, and these are definitely Chinese. And they come in a range of designs. My personal favourite is the fish-shaped one. According to the Yale University Museum, who also have these gaming pieces, they were popular trade goods in the West from the early 19th century, fading in popularity around 1840 as people changed their taste in gambling games. So I think the counters predate the box. For conservation treatment, the first thing I did was surface clean all the counters and all the straw work too, which took much longer as I had to work under the microscope, as the pieces were so small and fragile. I chose to clean first before consolidating the straw, as I didn't want to stick down dirt. However, sometimes the surface can be too fragile to clean and you would have to consolidate first, so it's always a judgment call. The cleaning agent I used was my own saliva, and that is a pile of dirty spit swabs from one of the lids. Next slide, please. Okay, so here I had to address the lifting straws and readhere them back in place. Some were stubborn and refused to lie flat, so I used a semi-permeable membrane and damp blotting paper with a plastic cover to make a zone of high humidity without making the object wet. Raising the local humidity caused the straws to relax, so I could adhere them down and leave them weighted to dry. Usually I don't add material to a fill, I usually don't add material such as a fill to an object unless it is structurally necessary to do so. However, having a decorative box with a ragged edge and a piece missing was distracting, especially as it was to be seen in the round. So with Edith's agreement, I intended to add a removable plain fill. Next slide, please. However, COVID hit and I found myself at home wondering if I could make a replica fill. I set about researching and reading as much as I could on straw marquetry. I found out it was a technique popularised in the 17th century by European makers, such as nuns, monks and convicts, basically people under lockdown. After looking closely at the object when I was cleaning it, I understood how to arrange the stalks and work the straw with a variety of hand tools. So I gave it a go, and much to the amusement of my family, I found the best way to dye straw to make it look old and faded was in a tea bath. So these are my different brew strengths and my colour matches. Next slide, please. And this is my first attempt on the left. When I brought it into the museum and matched it up to the object, it was way off, with many mistakes. One being I was cutting in metric and the original maker was using imperial, but it was a learning curve and I felt I had gained enough proficiency to try again. I realised I had to select each repair straw by colour, then scalpel cut with precision to match the width variations of the original. The rest of the pattern would not match if a preceding strip was cut even slightly too thickly or thinly. Next slide, please. So this time I used a proper press, as seen on the left in our studio, to get a superior finish, which is much better than squashing straws between a pile of heavy books. Next slide, please. And this is the box after conservation with the replica fill facing you. The replica panel is a fully removable insert and produced as a technical insight into straw craft. I really enjoyed the opportunity to learn this new skill. Next slide, please. And hopefully it looks well enough to sit with the other objects in the case, notably Sarah Power's bimetal brooches, based on her observations of the box. And now I'll hand you over to Ellen.
Hello, I'm Ellen McKeever. I'm the paper conservator for the National Museum of Ireland, and I was asked to conserve this pocket globe and container for the InForm exhibition. This object inspired Laura Matty-Kite, who is a ceramicist, and she was most inspired by the shape of the object because this comes in two pieces. You have a 19th century pocket globe on the right here, and then the container that came with it. And if you can see, the container actually has a celestial map on the interior, which matches the globe on the globe itself. Next slide, please. So as a paper conservator, I didn't really have much experience with spherical objects, and this is a composite object as well. So historic globes are made up of layers and layers of materials kind of stuck together, and you can see this better on the container. What you have is layers of wood, millboard, a gesso plaster kind of layer, and then on top of that you'll have paper which has been printed and then hand toned, and then on top of that you have a varnish. And then on the exterior of the container itself, you have kind of a treated leather layer, and then both have little bits of metal pieces on them as well. So I was a bit wary of doing anything to the globe without more information because, as I said before, I'm a paper conservator. I'm not used to dealing with the shape of objects. But luckily, there was an online course in the conservation of historic globes going on at the same time as the first lockdown in Ireland, and the museum kindly agreed to pay for this for me. So that was great. So these globes, they suffer a very specific type of damage because you have different layers of different materials adhere to each other, and they react differently as they age and if they're exposed to different environments. And what you have is usually the stronger layers will tear apart the weaker layers. And you can see this particularly on the container. The globe itself was actually in quite good condition. The container had protected it. You had some abrasion of the paper layer, which you can see there. The varnish has been abraded away, and also the varnish had darkened with time. The container itself was in a pretty bad condition. It had actually suffered a lot of physical damage at some point and had been repaired by the museum quite early on. The bottom half of the container has this very large textile repair on it, and I wasn't too sure what to do with it because it had become very unstable. As a result of this, the object wasn't safe to handle and definitely wasn't safe to put on display. But when I was speaking to our furniture conservator, Patrick Boyle, he mentioned that the material that was used is very similar to a material used on very old repairs on harps in our collection. So I made the decision to keep what I could of this repair because it's part of the life of the object. You also have problems with the paper layer and the gesso layer. They're delaminating and falling off. So again, this object aesthetically wasn't really up to scratch to put on display, but as well was very difficult to handle. Next slide, please. So based on all this, my treatment for this object focused on making sure that the object was safe to put on display while retaining evidence of its use life and how old it was. So to begin with, I dry cleaned the object with soft brushes and smoke sponges. And then for the varnished paper layers, I removed some of the dirt, surface dirt with saliva swabs again, like Hannah had done to the straw marquetry box. And then I pulled back the repair and removed the unstable piece of the pocket globes container. And then I removed what had been holding it in place, which were very old pieces of cardboard, which were very unstable and acidic. And I replaced them with toned Japanese papers, which you can see there at the bottom. Because this is a spherical object, again, it's quite hard to keep repairs in place, so I use magnets to do that. After the object was more physically stable overall, I repaired the gesso layer and the paper layer, and I used the idea of like with like, which is used in conservation sometimes. So the gesso layer I consolidated and repaired with a protein-based adhesive, which in this case was a high-quality gelatin, which was applied warm. And then for the paper layers, they were repaired and consolidated with a methyl cellulose. Any Japanese repairs to the wooden layer, Japanese tissue repairs, I used a wheat starch paste because that's a slightly stronger cellulose-based glue. And then after all that, I gave it a little bit of a buff to try to bring back the sheen of the varnish on the methyl cellulose repairs to the paper. Next slide, please. So this was the object after treatment. You can see actually in the top left, there's a difference in the color of the varnish on the interior of the pocket globe. That's actually because of light damage, which I think Hannah is going to talk a little bit more about after me. What happened was that the globe was kept in one side, and you can see there the damage that light does to museum objects. And then finally, we have an image of it on display beside the ceramics that were inspired by it. And the Laura was inspired by the shape of the globe inside its container. And I think the way that it was put on display by Hannah really reflects that very nicely. So yeah, this is a really fun object for me to conserve. It was one of the first objects I did for the museum. And I got some help from Hannah and Patrick because, again, it was kind of a whole new world for me. Some composite and some round. So yeah, it was a great experience. Thanks very much.
Just to move on now to the object installation. We did mock-ups before we put everything into the case, as for every exhibition. And you see here the conservation studio again with some of the objects before they went on display. So we have a base mount there on the blue base mount, and then a wonderful leg of a bedstead, of an Indian bed, basically, from the 19th century. It's Indian metalwork, beadry ware. So you have inlaid silver coming down in spiral shapes. And that was the inspiration for Deirdre Murphy's jewellery. And you see the same leg of the bedstead in the case, and in front of it, some of the jewellery that Deirdre made, pendants and earrings that she made, and she picked up that spiral form from the leg. But back to installation, it's quite a nice process that got a little bit postponed and held up by the pandemic, obviously, last year. So it was a lot of rescheduling for the exhibition, but we got there in the end with the help of Denise Byrne as well, who you see on the right-hand side in the picture there, who made all the mounts for the exhibition and plinth, and also some of the pinning work. And on this image here, the large image you see in the center, our colleague Patrick Boyle from the conservation department as well. Ellen mentioned him, and Denise on the left-hand side again. And we were putting objects into cases, and Hannah will say a little bit now about the pinning work that was done, for example, for Deirdre's jewellery you see in the image here as well on the right, just to keep the objects in place, and also about light levels in the exhibition. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Edith. Yeah, mounting objects is very important. And with jewellery, we wanted to secure the pieces, but in an unobtrusive way. So my colleague Patrick took lots of measurements, and with specially shaped pins, using Denise's lovely bespoke plinths, he created a wobble-free mount. We really had to consider movement. As you can see, the gallery floors are all wooden planks, and they're uneven and quite bouncy. So the jewellery, as well as the ceramic, all the ceramics, the smaller pieces had to be fixed down by ceramics conservator Lorna Barnes. So it was a big group effort in mounting. Next slide, please. And once objects are in the cases, we check light levels falling on objects, and we use a light meter, seen here on the left, to measure the light intensity in units of lux, and also watts per lumen for ultraviolet light, which is the high energy, really bad light we'd like to cut out completely. So Ellen specified a low light level of no more than 50 lux on the architectural drawing we have on show. And the light meter held in front, that's a spot of the highest point at 40 lux, so all good, the lower the better. I also specified a low light level on this display of a lacquer box, chosen by Jodie Wright as inspiration for her 3 absolutely stunning pendants, which were mounted above on the Perspex fin. New slide, please. So this is the Japanese inkstone box, which Jodie picked, bought by the museum in 1897, and it features takamaki and nashiji decoration. Takamaki means high sprinkle picture. So the front features a tree branch of lacquer in relief, incorporating a background of sprinkled metallic powders. And it also features additions of copper alloy birds. Next slide, please. On the underside of the lid is the nashiji, or pear finish lacquer, because it resembles the speckled skin of a Japanese pear. Nashiji is known for its brilliant luster and metallic flakes. In this case, we have gold and silver flakes. And I'm using a microscope to check for damage and its extent, as lacquer is incredibly sensitive to light and the high energy of ultraviolet light breaking down its molecular bonds. As this is the underside of the lid, the lacquer is in good condition with no obvious light damage. Next slide, please. But you can see here the lacquer on the front does suffer from quite extensive light damage. It is dull and faded because of a network of very fine cracks. And this damage is permanent and irreversible. You can see the surface lacquer is broken down so much that the silver flakes are no longer protected and have tarnished to black. If this object was on display in too much light or on display for too long a duration, then more damage would occur. So that's why when you get to visit the exhibition, you can see some cases are lit darker than others. And that's because we're doing as much as we can to protect our vulnerable surfaces whilst making them available for use. So thanks. Back to Edith.
Thank you, Hannah. So we're coming to the end of the short presentation. I have here some images of the catalogue, which you can find in the shop, in the museum shop, or also online, and you can order it for just €5 and browse through all of the objects that are on display. And you also find short statements of the makers about their process, and you also find statements online, and you might have seen it on the YouTube channel, the museum's new YouTube channel as well. All 22 makers are there to tell you a bit more about their inspiration and what is new basically in terms of technique, and what they are planning to take forward into the future as well from that project. So we hope you get a chance to come in during the summer. Drop over, it's free admission. It's open until the end of September, so the last Sunday in September it's open until, and we have then a new installation, a new exhibition coming up in November in the same exhibition space. And that new exhibition will be art and history next to each other again, but in a very different way. It will be an exhibition called Studio and State about the John and Hazel Lavery and how they used their studio in London in 1921 to host the British and the Irish delegations while they were negotiating the Anglo-Irish Treaty. So political history paired with art history and with society at the time 100 years ago, just to mark the centenary of the Anglo-Irish Treaty. So that's going to go into this space afterwards, but until September, until the end of September, you can still see InForm. You have a little screen there as well with the films of the makers, and as I mentioned before, the tools and all of the historic and the new objects next to each other. So thank you very much for joining today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, or let us know if you want to just ask them as well. I hand over to Ashley now to chair this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edith, and thank you, Ellen and Hannah. That was really, really interesting. And it really does show you how much work, time and effort goes into preparing an exhibition from start to finish. And often, you know, members of the public don't get to see that side of it from the conservation and how important all of that is. So I believe we have a question that's just come in now for Hannah, actually. So Hannah, the question is, what did you use for readhering the loose straw pieces on the actual box itself?
I used an adhesive, Lascaux. I used the Lascaux based adhesive. Yeah, Lascaux.
Okay, perfect. I have my own question then as well. And again, if, as Edith says, anyone has any questions, you can, if you want to raise your hand or if you want to type in into the chat box, work away. But just for Edith, in terms of InForm and the partnership with the Design and Crafts Council and the skills course, why do you think this partnership is so important for the skills and design course students themselves to work with the museum?
Well, obviously to see new objects to inspire them. So like to see how craftsmen and women did it 100 to 300 and up to 2000 years ago. We have a little vase in there, glass vase or vessel that was made around 2000 years ago. So to use this ancient knowledge really and carry it forward and learn in terms of technique, in terms of pattern, texture, all sorts of things that go into the material and functional side of objects, but also just the form as well. And to really take that. I think it's important to take that time in any course, design course or arts course like this, to explore, you know, to really have that space and time to go really close, look really closely into an object, and to really see all the different collections. I mean, there's so much, thousands of objects to choose from, but to really hone in on one object then finally, and really take it further. So this closeness to the object, I think, and the historic sort of traditions and functions and techniques that come with it are important. But also then it was a mutual learning, really, you know, for all of us, for the tutors as well. They stated in discussing new techniques and ideas with students, you know, and could that be realized? Could that type of glaze be made, or could that shape or form be fired in a kiln? So it's just that mutual learning. So the more knowledge you put together, I think the bigger the outcome. So that was the main benefits.
Brilliant. And I suppose following on from that mutual learning, Hannah, in terms of the straw box, and you kind of made up your own version, you experimented, what is the benefits of you doing all of that research to kind of make your own interpretation of it, between the kind of tea back dyes and things like that? What is the benefits of going out there and physically kind of making your own pieces to kind of replicate the original box?
Yeah, I could have just put a plain paper fill in and just toned it to the box, and it would have looked fine. But I had the opportunity and the time, and I wanted to keep my hand skills up during lockdown, because my job is very based at the bench working on objects, and so I needed to do something with my hands. So that was kind of the reason. And then I just kind of got a feel for the material more then as well, the actual doing something rather than just reading about it. It gave me a lot more insight to just the workmanship, the phenomenal workmanship that goes into straw marquetry. So if I ever get to work on another piece, I'll have a greater understanding of it, having done it. Kind of, wow, that really is quite remarkable stuff.
Yeah, it seems across the board, as Edith said as well, between the students, the tutors, members of staff in the museum, everyone seemed to learn some sort of new skill or new ways of working and new techniques. And, you know, it really traveled through from beginning to end, I think, with the exhibition as well. And Ellen, you had mentioned that with the globe, the pocket globe that you would have worked on, and you did a course to work on it as well, and it was your first time working on a 3D object made of paper. So what was the benefits, or maybe positives and negatives, of working on a 3D paper object like that for the first time?
Well, so I'd be used to working on kind of fine art on paper, historic documents, books, which are 3D objects, but this was very different for me. And it was really interesting to kind of get to grips with the shape itself, because obviously I share a studio with Hannah, so it was very helpful to have someone there who's used to working on 3-dimensional objects the whole time to help me with magnets. But for me, it was interesting to have a material that I was very used to, like paper and millboard, varnish paper I'm very used to, but also like materials like wood that I wouldn't have worked with too much before. And I only began work at the National Museum in February. As I said, this is one of my first objects. It was a really good chance to talk to some of the other conservators, Patrick and Hannah, about kind of their specialisms and get some input. The National Museum's conservation department is kind of unique in Ireland in that we have a lot of different kind of specialisms. A lot of the time it will be just paper, just books. So that was really great for me. And the online course was really interesting as well, because it was a lot of paper conservators were like, oh, I don't know what to do with a globe. And then being told about the history of these objects, which is very interesting. There's a Passe video on YouTube showing kind of how globes were being made. I think it was in the 1930s or 40s, and it still follows a very similar technique. They kind of perfected it at a certain point and just kept going with it. So yeah, the positives were very interesting. The negatives were, I don't think there were any negatives really. It was just an interesting learning experience.
Yeah, excellent. And really interesting kind of get all of your insight around, you know, learning these new skills and kind of developing and using your hands more throughout the exhibition process as well. Does anybody else have any other questions from members of the public that they'd like to ask at all? I think we have one coming in here. Oh, Helen Beaumont, thanking Edith, Hannah, and Ellen for their very insightful talk. So that's excellent. If we don't have any other questions, I think we will leave it there. Just to let you know, in terms of the events, this is actually one of 3 in conversation events, and the next one will be happening on the 20th of August. And again, Edith will be back to talk to 2 students who would have worked as part of the project itself. One of the students from the ceramics course and one of the students from the jewellery course as well. So that'll be on the 20th of August. And we also have a 3rd one happening on Culture Night around the 17th of September, I believe. And that will be in conversation with some more of the students and actually the tutors with Edith as well. So definitely keep an eye out. If you want to learn more about the events that we have for InForm, visit www.museum.ie under Decorative Arts and History, and you will see our list of events that we have happening during the time as well. And a huge thank you to Design and Crafts Council, particularly Aisling Clancy in the Education Department, for partnering with us on these in conversation events. Very much appreciated, and for hosting us on Zoom as well. And if you would like to find out any information about the education programs in the museum, you can contact us at educationcb@museum.ie. And finally, just to thank Edith, Hannah, and Ellen for your time. It was really, really interesting, and we very much appreciate you sharing your insights and your valuable experience and insights to everybody today. So thank you very much.